Welcome to Classified Culture. This channel was created to provide new and original stories for anyone enthusiastic about science fiction and horror stories. If this is your first time listening, or if you are a returning member, thank you for your support and attention. If you are enjoying the content in today's story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a message in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel. Well, I suppose there is not much else to say, other than my favorite reason for being here has arrived. It's time to let the words I speak guide your imagination with a dark and twisted tale. The tires crunched on gravel as Tom steered the car off the deserted road onto the campsite's narrow entrance. The forest seemed to close in around them, a dense wall of emerald green, punctuated by towering pines that stretched towards the heavens like skeletal fingers. Beth shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her unease growing with each passing minute. "Is this even the right place?" Max asked from the back seat, his voice echoing slightly despite the car's closed windows. Lily, nestled between him and the door, looked up from her sketchbook with wide, nervous eyes. "It's on the map," Tom replied gruffly, squinting at the faded printout Beth had insisted they bring along. "Besides, we've been driving for hours. This has to be it." The car rolled to a stop in front of a dilapidated sign that read, "Welcome to Whispering Pines Campground." The paint was chipped and weathered, the wood beneath visible like skeletal bone. Beth noticed that the sign's chains had been cut, leaving it to sway gently in the breeze like a noose. They stepped out into the cool twilight, the air heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Beth stretched her arms overhead, feeling the tension in her muscles from hours behind the wheel. As she lowered them, she noticed something peculiar. The silence was almost absolute. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness that seemed to muffle even their own movements. Tom began unloading the car, passing bags and coolers to Max, while Beth retrieved a map of the campsite from her door pocket. She unfolded it carefully, tracing their route with her finger until she found their assigned spot. Plot 23B, nestled deep within the forest. A shiver ran down her spine as she noticed that none of the surrounding plots were marked. "Ready?" Tom asked, hoisting a large cooler onto his shoulder. Beth nodded, tucking the map back into its pocket and grabbing Lily's hand. Together, they followed Tom along the winding dirt path deeper into Whispering Pines. The forest seemed to close in around them as they walked, the canopy above blocking out most of the remaining sunlight. Shadows lengthened and grew darker, dancing macabrely at the edges of their vision. Beth couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but whenever she glanced back over her shoulder, there was nothing but empty trees. Plot 23B appeared suddenly, as if materializing out of nowhere. It was larger than Beth had imagined, with a large fire pit at its center and enough space for their tent and sleeping bags. But something about it made her stomach churn. Perhaps it was the way the other plots nearby seemed to have been abandoned years ago, or maybe it was the eerie quiet that hung heavy in the air. Tom set down the cooler and began assembling the tent while Beth started unpacking their supplies. Max helped his father, but Lily lingered near her mother, clutching at her arm. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't like this place." Beth smiled reassuringly, though her own heart felt heavy with dread. "It's just different, sweetheart," she said softly. "We'll make it fun, I promise." But even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure if she believed them anymore. As they worked together to set up camp, Beth couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong here at Whispering Pines. The forest felt wrong somehow, its silence oppressive rather than peaceful, its beauty marred by an underlying sense of unease. She caught herself looking over her shoulder again and again, half expecting to find something standing there watching them. But there was nothing, just empty trees and shadows that seemed to grow darker with each passing moment. Night fell like a shroud around them once they'd finished setting up camp. Tom started a fire in the pit while Beth prepared dinner over a small portable stove. Max strung up lanterns between the trees, their warm glow pushing back some of the darkness, but not all of it. The shadows seemed to huddle closer now, as if drawn by the light like moths to a flame. Dinner was a quiet affair, eaten mostly in silence save for the occasional comment about the food or the fire's warmth. Afterward, Beth cleaned up while Tom took Lily and Max on a short walk around their plot, showing them how to use the bear box to store their food overnight. When they returned, Beth had already begun setting out their sleeping bags inside the tent. "Who wants to tell ghost stories?" Max asked, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. Lily shook her head firmly, burrowing deeper into her jacket, as if it could protect her from whatever lurked in the darkness beyond their little circle of light. "I'll start," Tom offered gruffly, settling onto a log nearby. He launched into an old favorite about a hiker lost in the woods who encounters strange phenomena along his journey. His voice was deep and soothing, drawing them all in despite themselves. Beth listened absently, her gaze drawn again and again to the shadows just beyond their fire's reach. She thought she saw something moving out there, a flicker of darkness against darkness, but whenever she looked directly at it, there was nothing there. Just more empty trees and endless night. As Tom's story reached its climax, Beth noticed that Lily had fallen asleep where she sat, her head lolling onto Max's shoulder. She smiled softly at the sight, envying her daughter her ability to find peace even here in this unsettling place. "All right," Tom said finally, concluding his tale with a dramatic flourish. "Who wants to go next?" But there was no response from either of them. Beth looked up to find Max staring into the fire, his expression thoughtful and distant. When she followed his gaze, she saw that the flames were guttering low, their light barely enough to reach the edges of their campsite now. "We should get some sleep," she suggested softly, standing up and brushing off her pants. "We've got a big day planned tomorrow." Tom nodded agreement, helping her wake Lily gently so they could all crawl into the tent together. As Beth zipped them inside, she took one last look out at their campsite before letting darkness claim them completely. And that's when she saw it, a figure standing at the tree line, barely more than a silhouette against the night. It seemed to be watching them, though whether with curiosity or malevolence, Beth couldn't tell. She blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by the shadows once more. But she knew what she had seen. And as she settled down beside Tom and Lily in their sleeping bags, listening to the sounds of the forest outside their tent, she wondered if they weren't alone after all at Whispering Pines campground. As Beth lay there, staring up at the canvas ceiling of their tent, she tried to convince herself that what she'd seen was merely a trick of the light. Her mind played tricks on her sometimes, especially when she was tired or stressed. But as the minutes ticked by, each one stretching into infinity, she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep until she checked. She slipped carefully out of her sleeping bag and unzipped the tent flap, wincing at the noise it made despite her efforts to be quiet. Tom stirred slightly but didn't wake. He was a heavy sleeper, one of the many reasons why Beth loved him dearly despite his impulsive ideas like this camping trip. Stepping outside into the cool night air, she felt immediately vulnerable, without the fire's warmth and light. She had meant to bring a flashlight with her but had forgotten in her haste to assure herself there was nothing out there. Now, she could barely make out the shapes of their tents from the faint moonlight filtering through the thick canopy above. The forest seemed even quieter now than before, as if it were holding its breath along with Beth. She took a tentative step forward, then another, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness around her. There was nothing there, no figure standing at the tree line, no indication that anything had ever been there at all. Just as she began to feel foolish for having come out here in the first place, she heard it, a soft rustling sound coming from deeper within the woods. It was barely audible, little more than a whisper of movement against the earth. But it sent a shiver down Beth's spine, nonetheless. She stood rooted to the spot, hardly daring to breathe as she listened intently. The sound came again, slightly louder this time, and again, moving closer with each repetition, until Beth could pinpoint its location, directly behind their tents, where no one had been earlier that night. She swallowed hard against a lump forming in her throat, and took a step back towards the safety of their campsite. But as she did so, she caught sight of something else, something that made her heart leap into her mouth with terror. The ground around their tents was covered in footprints, hundreds of them, leading away from their campsite and disappearing into the darkness beyond. They were small prints, barely visible against the earth, but unmistakably human nonetheless. Beth's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Had they been followed here? Was someone else camping nearby without their knowledge? But those explanations didn't account for the eerie silence that hung heavy over Whispering Pines like a shroud, or the unsettling feeling that something was deeply wrong at this place. She turned to run back towards the tent when she heard it again, except this time, there were words accompanying the rustling sound, a child's voice, whispering over and over again in the darkness. "Lily, Lily, where are you?" Beth froze, her blood running cold at the sound of her daughter's name being called so softly, so urgently. She knew that voice. It was Max's, but there was something wrong with it tonight. It sounded hollow somehow, distant and echoing, as if he were speaking from deep within a cave rather than just a few feet away. She spun around, searching desperately for her son in the gloom. But even as she did so, she knew she wouldn't find him, not here anyway. That voice belonged elsewhere, calling out to Lily from some other place entirely. Beth stumbled back into their tent, shaking Tom awake with urgent hands and whispered words. "We need to go," she said urgently, packing up their things as quickly and quietly as possible. "Now." Tom looked at her blankly for a moment before registering the panic in her voice. Then he was moving too, helping her gather their belongings while trying not to wake Lily. Together they crept out of the tent, leaving behind everything that wasn't essential. Sleeping bags, blankets, even some of their food supplies. As Beth led them silently away from Plot 23B, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched once more. This time, though, there was no figure standing at the tree line. Instead, it felt as if hundreds of eyes were upon them, hidden deep within the forest's shadows. They moved steadily westward, towards where Beth hoped the main road lay, guided only by the faint light of the moon above. They walked for what felt like hours, each step deeper into the unknown than the last. The forest seemed to go on forever here, untouched by time or civilization, its ancient trees standing guard over secrets best left undisturbed. Beth could feel their weight pressing down upon her shoulders now, threatening to crush her beneath their collective gaze. But still they walked on, driven forward by some instinctual knowledge that they had to keep moving if they wanted to survive this place intact. And just when Beth began to fear they were lost forever amidst these endless woods, she saw it, a glimmer of light up ahead, barely visible through the trees, but unmistakably artificial in origin. She quickened her pace, almost running now as she led them towards that beacon of hope. As they drew closer, she realized it was coming from an old wooden signpost, one long since swallowed by moss and decay. But there, carved into its face with careful precision, were words that made Beth's heart leap with relief. "Welcome to Whispering Pines Campground. Exit this way." Beneath the arrow was a narrow path, overgrown but still visible beneath the undergrowth. Without hesitation, Beth led them down it, following its winding course through the darkness, until finally, mercifully, they emerged onto the main road. There, parked beside the entrance gate, was their car, untouched and waiting for them like an old friend. Beth unlocked it with trembling hands, ushering Tom and Lily inside before sliding behind the wheel herself. She didn't bother turning on the headlights. Instead, she simply started the engine and drove away from Whispering Pines as fast as she dared. As they left that accursed place behind them, Beth risked a glance back into the rearview mirror. The forest stood silent once more, its secrets locked safely away within those ancient woods. But there, just before it disappeared from sight entirely, she thought she saw something moving among the trees. A figure, barely more than a silhouette against the night, watching them go with eyes that seemed to burn even in the darkness, and then it was gone, swallowed by the shadows once more, leaving Beth to wonder if they had truly escaped Whispering Pines at all. or if perhaps some part of it had followed them home instead. But such thoughts could wait until later. For now, she focused on driving them safely away from that terrible place, putting as much distance between themselves and those haunted woods as possible. As they sped onwards through the night, Beth vowed never again to set foot in Whispering Pines campground, not for herself, nor even for her children. For there were some things best left undisturbed. Hidden deep within the heart of the forest were they. As the first light of dawn began to seep into the sky, Beth emerged from their car, her body aching from the long drive. She had stopped at a small motel some miles away, insisting they all needed sleep before deciding what to do next. Now, as she stood outside the room, watching Tom and Lily still lost in fitful slumber, she felt an unsettling gnaw of unease. Max's absence was a void that seemed to grow larger with each passing moment. She returned to the car, retrieving her mobile phone from the glove compartment. There were no missed calls or messages. Not even a signal bar graced its screen. They were still far from civilization, it seemed, too deep in the woods for technology's reach. She tucked it away, instead pulling out a map they'd bought at a gas station before leaving home. Its creases were worn now, edges dog-eared from anxious fingers tracing paths long since traveled. Max had ventured into these very woods yesterday morning, eager to explore while Tom set up camp and Lily helped Beth prepare lunch. He promised not to wander too far, but hours later, as shadows stretched and merged with darkness, he hadn't returned. They'd searched together then, voices echoing eerily through the trees, calling his name until their throats were raw. But there was no sign of him, only those whispered echoes mocking them from the night. Beth unfolded the map on the hood of the car, tracing their route with her finger. Whispering Pines campground lay somewhere within this thicket of green lines and squiggles, marked by a tiny black dot labeled camp. She ran her fingertip along the winding roads until she found where they'd parked last night, or rather, where they thought they had. There was no actual road leading to Whispering Pines. Instead, it seemed they'd turned off onto some overgrown path that didn't exist on this map at all. A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered how easily they'd followed those faint tire tracks through the undergrowth, as if the forest itself had guided them there. But who had made those tracks? And why were they still there when no other trace of the campground remained? She shook off the thought, focusing instead on the task at hand. Max had ventured out around midday yesterday, heading north according to his vague directions. Beth drew an imaginary circle around that point, marking roughly how far he might have wandered before losing track of time or getting lost. Then she took a deep breath and folded the map away, steeling herself for what needed to be done. Back inside the motel room, Tom was stirring, blinking groggily at the sunlight filtering through the curtains. Lily remained curled up beside him, her small body barely visible beneath the blankets. Beth touched his shoulder gently, whispering his name until he turned to face her. "We need to go back," she said softly, so as not to wake their daughter. Max didn't have his phone with him. If we're going to find him, we'll have to search on foot. Tom rubbed his eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling for a moment, before nodding slowly. "You're right, but Beth, what if he's not there? What if something happened?" She took his hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. "Then we'll find out and deal with it together. But until then, we don't give up, not on our son." They left Lily sleeping peacefully, tucking a note onto the pillow beside her head, promising they'd return soon. Then they set off once more into Whispering Pines, driving until they reached the point where they'd veered off onto that hidden path yesterday morning. As Beth parked their car at the side of the road, she couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched again. The woods seemed quieter today, somehow more expectant. It was as if nature itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. They began walking along the edge of the forest, Tom leading the way with a determined stride, while Beth followed close behind, eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of their son's passage. Every now and then they'd call out his name, listening intently for even the faintest echo of an answering voice. But only silence greeted them, heavy and unyielding. As they ventured deeper into Whispering Pines, Beth noticed something peculiar about the trees. Many bore strange carvings etched deep into their bark, symbols she didn't recognize, each one unique yet somehow familiar too. She reached out tentatively to touch one, running her fingertips over its intricate patterns. It felt cold beneath her touch, almost slick with moisture despite the heat of the day. "What do you think they mean?" Tom asked, noticing her fascination. She shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but there's something about them. It's like they're calling out too." He gave her a worried glance but said nothing more, instead focusing his attention on searching for any trace of Max. They continued on, falling into a rhythm of calling his name and listening for replies, checking every clearing and examining each carved tree they passed. Hours passed in this manner, the sun climbing higher overhead until its rays slanted through the canopy above like golden spears. Beth's throat grew raw from shouting, her muscles aching from walking so far without finding any sign of their son. Yet still, she pushed on, driven by some primal instinct that refused to let her stop. Then suddenly, Tom froze mid-step, his hand raised in warning. Beth stopped too, watching as he stepped cautiously towards a cluster of ferns growing dense around the base of an ancient oak. There, half hidden beneath their fronds, was something pale and slender, a bone perhaps, or maybe just another twisted root. But no, it couldn't be either of those things because suddenly Tom reached down and lifted it clear of the ferns, turning to hold it out towards Beth with a look of horror etched onto his face. It was a shoe, small enough to fit Max's foot perfectly. Beth felt bile arise in her throat as she took the shoe from him, turning it over in her hands. The laces were still tied neatly, just like they'd been when he left yesterday morning. And there, scuffed into the toe, was a single word written in what looked like blood. Lily. She clutched the shoe tightly against her chest, feeling nausea arise within her again as she tried desperately to make sense of this new development. Why would Max have taken off his shoe? And why write Lily's name on it? Unless... No, she wouldn't think that way. Wouldn't let fear take root in her mind and choke out rational thought. Instead, she focused on what they did know. Max had been here, sometime yesterday. He'd taken off one shoe, written something on it then. What? Put it back on again? Unless he hadn't. Unless someone else had put it there, intending for them to find it. But who? And why? Tom took the shoe gently from her grasp, setting it down carefully beside the tree before taking her hand in his own. Beth let Tom guide her away, his fingers entwined with hers. They walked in silence, the weight of that solitary shoe hanging heavy between them like a dark promise. The forest seemed to press closer around them now, whispers rustling through leaves, as if sharing secrets just out of earshot. Each step deeper into whispering pines felt heavier than the last, as though they tread on quicksand threatening to pull them under. After what felt like hours, Tom stopped abruptly. He pointed towards a tree Beth hadn't noticed before. An ancient behemoth with massive roots, sprawling like serpentine limbs across the forest floor. Its trunk was carved up high, symbols etched deep into the bark that seemed eerily familiar, yet eluded recognition. At its base lay scattered remnants of what appeared to have once been Max's backpack. Beth approached cautiously, crouching down to examine the contents strewn around like morbid confetti. A small plastic dinosaur, one of Max's favorites, lay face down amidst the undergrowth, its tiny limbs splayed helplessly. She picked it up gently, brushing dirt from its painted surface before clutching it tightly in her fist. "Look at this," Tom said quietly behind her, holding out a crumpled photograph rescued from the debris. It showed Lily smiling widely, sunlight catching her hair like a halo as she sat on their back porch steps. Beth remembered taking that picture last summer. Max had been laughing then too, arms wrapped around his sister's neck as they both squinted into the camera. But now, something was drawn onto Lily's face in the same dark substance used to write her name on Max's shoe. Crude lines slashed across her features, turning laughter into a grotesque grimace. Beth felt bile rise again, burning acidic at the back of her throat. "We need to find him," she whispered hoarsely, standing up and clutching both dinosaur and photograph against her chest like talismans. "Something's happening here, Tom. Something wrong." He nodded solemnly, tucking the defiled picture into his pocket before taking Beth's hand once more. They continued their search, each step now laden, not just with dread, but also determination. As they ventured deeper still into whispering pines, Beth couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. Not by Max. He was out there somewhere, waiting to be found, but by something else. Something old and malevolent lurking just beyond their periphery. The forest grew denser around them, shadows growing darker as clouds began to gather overhead like vultures circling a dying animal. The air felt heavy with impending storm, charged with an electric tension that made Beth's skin prickle unpleasantly. She glanced up occasionally through breaks in the canopy, watching as sunlight faded little by little until it seemed almost twilight. Then came the first drops of rain, fat and cold against their faces. Within moments it was pouring, each droplet striking leaves above like tiny drumbeats heralding some ancient ritual. Beth and Tom sought shelter under a large tree, huddling together beneath its sprawling branches as water poured down around them in torrents. Beth leaned against the trunk, sliding down until she sat on the damp ground with her knees drawn up to her chest. She hugged them tightly, feeling Max's dinosaur still clutched within one hand, and Lily's photograph pressed against her heart beneath her jacket. Her eyes fluttered closed briefly before snapping open again, haunted by visions of those crude lines slashed across her daughter's face. Tom sat beside her silently, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. They listened to the rain beating against the earth, watched as rivulets formed and grew, carving paths through the undergrowth towards unseen destinations. Beth felt a chill seep into her bones despite Tom's warmth, a coldness that seemed to emanate from within rather than without. As suddenly as it had begun, the storm abated. Rain tapered off until it was little more than a drizzle, then stopped altogether, leaving behind a hushed silence, broken only occasionally by distant thunder, growling like some slumbering beast disturbed by dreams. Beth stood up cautiously, brushing leaves and dirt from her clothing before holding out a hand to help Tom rise as well. They stepped back onto the path they'd been following when the storm hit, eyeing the darkness ahead, warily now that daylight had nearly deserted them entirely. They walked side by side, fingers entwined once more for comfort amidst such gloom. Their breath misted in the chilled air, each exhale visible for a brief moment before dissipating into nothingness. Beth's senses seemed heightened somehow. She could hear every rustle of leaves, feel every shift of wind against her skin. Then came another smell, subtle yet unmistakable beneath even the damp earth aroma after rain. Something rotten, decaying. It made Beth's stomach churn afresh, memories of that bloody shoe and defiled photograph surging back with renewed intensity. Tom must have noticed too, because he squeezed her hand tightly, pulling her slightly behind him as they pressed on towards whatever awaited them deeper within Whispering Pine's heart. He stepped carefully now, eyes scanning the forest floor intently for any sign of their son's passage through this forsaken place. The trees thinned slightly ahead, opening into a clearing where moonlight pooled like liquid silver upon the ground. Beth gasped softly, releasing Tom's hand as she stumbled forward into that glow. Before them stood another tree, even older than those surrounding it, its massive trunk twisted into knots and grotesque shapes by centuries of growth. And carved deep into its gnarled surface were faces, countless faces staring out with empty eye sockets, mouths open wide in silent scream. Beth recognized some of those expressions instantly. They mirrored her own terror at discovering Max missing. Others seemed older still, worn smooth over time but no less haunting for their familiarity. Amongst the multitude of visages carved into that ancient bark was one she knew well. Max's face peered out from among them, eyes wide with fear or surprise. It was hard to tell which emotion dominated his features, now frozen forever in wood. Beth reached out trembling fingers towards her son's likeness, tracing the lines etched around his mouth and eyes. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the clearing, cold enough to make Beth shiver violently despite being barely a breath upon her skin. It rustled leaves overhead, whispering secrets amongst themselves, before one final word seemed carried aloft on its chill breeze. Mama Dokti. Beth spun around, heart pounding wildly in her chest as she searched desperately for any sign of movement amidst the shadows cast by moonlight. But there was nothing, no one, just more trees standing silent sentinel around them. Yet still she heard it, a faint echo carried on wind currents, growing louder now with each passing moment until it resonated clearly within Beth's mind. Mama, help me. She took off running then, heedless of Tom's cry behind her, or the dangers hidden amongst whispering pines' dark embrace. One thought consumed her entirely. Max needed her, and she wouldn't rest until she found him, no matter what horrors lay waiting along the. Beth ran blindly, branches whipping her face as she plunged deeper into whispering pines. The forest seemed to close in around her, trees leaning together like conspirators plotting against intruders. She didn't care. Max's cry for help rang louder than any fear threatening to drown her senses. The terrain grew rougher underfoot, rocks jutting out suddenly from the earth as if attempting to trip her. Beth leaped over them with reckless abandon, breath coming in, ragged gasps that misted before her eyes. She felt no fatigue, only urgency propelling her forward, a primal instinct screaming within, "Find Max." As she burst into another clearing, moonlight revealed an ancient stone circle standing there, moss-covered and forgotten by time. Beth slowed momentarily, awestruck by its eerie beauty before pressing on, drawn towards the center where something glinted among the weeds. It was Lily's locket, silver, delicate, now tarnished with age or exposure to elements unknown. Beth picked it up gently, fingers brushing against a small folded note tucked inside. She unfolded it carefully, heart pounding wildly. Mama, I found something here. Something bad. I think it wants us gone, but won't let me leave. It whispers things, awful things. Please come find me. I'm scared. Love you. Max. Beth clutched the note tightly, eyes scanning the lines over and over until they blurred together. Then she heard it again. That faint echo carried on wind currents, growing louder now with each passing moment until it resonated clearly within her mind. Mama, help me. She took off running once more, determined this time to follow Max's trail. The forest seemed different somehow, darker, more sinister than before. Shadows moved independently of branches swaying overhead, slinking along the ground like serpents waiting to strike. The air grew heavy too, thick with anticipation and dread. It tasted metallic on her tongue, carrying whispers barely audible beneath the rustling leaves. Turn back. No use. You'll never find him. Beth gritted her teeth against their taunts, forcing herself onward despite the creeping unease, threatening to consume her whole. She couldn't turn back now, not when Max needed her most. The trees began to thin out eventually, giving way to dense underbrush that clawed at Beth's skin as she forged ahead. Soon enough, she stumbled upon a narrow path leading deeper into whispering pines, one she hadn't noticed before. It seemed almost too convenient, inviting even. But something was off about this trail too. The plants lining either side appeared twisted, their leaves blackened as if stricken by some horrible disease. And the silence, it was oppressive here, unnatural. No birds sang, nor animals stirred amongst the undergrowth. Beth followed the path anyway, drawn inexorably towards whatever awaited her at its end. As she walked, she noticed strange symbols etched into tree trunks alongside more familiar markings. Initials carved by teenagers seeking immortality through graffiti, lovers' hearts entwined with initials. These new symbols were unlike anything Beth had ever seen. Intricate spirals and jagged lines forming patterns that seemed to shift under her gaze. They made her dizzy if she stared too long, so she focused instead on placing one foot before the other, maintaining a steady pace despite the creeping dread threatening to overwhelm her senses. Eventually, The path opened up into another clearing where an old cabin stood rotting amongst the weeds. Its once red door hung crookedly from rusted hinges, windows shattered into jagged teeth, grinning menacingly at intruders. Yet there was something familiar about this place too. Beth felt as if she'd seen it before in photographs tucked away among Max's belongings. This must be where he'd gone after leaving their tent that morning, drawn here by some force beyond his control, perhaps even before the whispers began calling out to him. Beth approached cautiously, heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing desperate for release. Each step seemed louder than the last, announcing her arrival despite every effort at stealth. As she reached for the door handle, it creaked open unexpectedly, revealing utter darkness within. Beth hesitated briefly before stepping inside, guided only by memory of those photographs and vague hope that Max might still be found alive within these walls. The interior was even more decrepit than its exterior suggested. Floors warped underfoot, ceiling sagging perilously overhead. Still, something about this place felt alive too, breathing slowly, deeply, as if asleep but ready to awaken at any moment. Beth moved carefully through the gloom, fingers trailing along peeling wallpaper until they encountered a sudden draft blowing from somewhere up ahead. Following it led her deeper into the cabin's belly, past rooms filled with rotting furniture and memories best forgotten. Finally, she found herself standing before another door. This one closed tightly against intruders despite age and decay. Yet there was no lock preventing entry. Instead, carved into its surface were more of those strange symbols Beth had noticed earlier on trees lining the path here. She recognized them now for what they were, wards meant to keep something trapped behind this door, something dangerous enough to warrant such precautions being taken against its release. But who had placed these wards? And how long ago? Beth reached out hesitantly, tracing their patterns with trembling fingers before pressing firmly against the door itself. It groaned slowly inward, revealing a set of stairs leading down into utter blackness beyond. A cold wind blew suddenly from below, carrying with it whispers so faint Beth could barely make them out. Stay. Stay away. No use. You're too late. She ignored them, descending those steps anyway, despite the dread coiling tightly around her heart. Each step brought new terrors into view. Shadows writhing along walls like serpents waiting to strike. Figures frozen mid-flight, forever fleeing some unseen horror. And there, at the bottom of the stairs, stood Max. He seemed untouched by whatever had befallen this place, still wearing his dinosaur t-shirt and favorite jeans, despite being covered head to toe in dust. Yet his eyes, they were wrong somehow, staring sightlessly past Beth as if she wasn't even there. Max, her voice barely above a whisper, fear choking her throat. He turned slowly towards her then, lips curling back into a snarl that revealed teeth stained black with blood. Not Max anymore, he rasped, voice distorted by something unnatural residing within his lungs. He belongs to them now. Beth stumbled backwards, horror rooted deep within her soul at the sight of this son possessed by some malevolent force. But before she could flee, shadows detached themselves from walls and rushed forward, surrounding her entirely. You're ours too, they whispered in unison, voices melding together until it was impossible to tell where one ended and another began. And though Beth screamed defiance against their claims, struggling desperately against unseen bonds, holding her captive here amidst darkness eternal, she knew deep down there would be no escape this time. Whispering pines had claimed them both, mother and son lost forever amidst its ancient embrace. Beth's breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale misting briefly before vanishing into the heavy air. The descent seemed endless, her footsteps echoing like thunderous accusations against the silence. Max stood there, silent sentinel amidst the gloom, his eyes now gleaming with an otherworldly light. She could feel it then, a cold tendril of dread winding its way up her spine, coiling around her heart and squeezing until she thought it might burst. But still, She took another step forward, and then another, until finally she stood before him, close enough to see the pores on his cheeks, the dried blood crusting at the corners of his mouth, close enough to smell the decay already setting in beneath his skin. "Max," she whispered again, hoping against hope that he might recognize her voice, break free from whatever held him captive here. But his gaze remained distant, unseeing. A shiver ran through her, raising goose flesh along her arms despite the oppressive heat of this subterranean world. Something moved behind Max then, a shifting in the shadows that caught Beth's eye. She squinted, trying to make out its form amidst the darkness, but it was like trying to grasp smoke between fingers. It seemed almost alive, hungry. A soft scrape echoed through the chamber, followed by another, and another still, like nails being dragged across stone floors, each one sending a jolt of terror coursing through Beth's veins. She knew those sounds. They were etched into her very being after years spent listening to Lily's nightmares played out in the dark. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from the blackness beyond Max. Beth's heart pounded wildly against her ribs as she turned slowly towards their source. Her eyes strained against the darkness, searching for some sign of who or what was making them. But there was nothing. Only more shadows writhing along walls like snakes, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Come closer." "Yes. Step into our embrace. We've been waiting so long." Her breath hitched in her throat as she realized something. Those weren't just whispers anymore. They had voices now, plural, and they were all around her. She spun around, desperate to find their source, but there was nothing but more shadows writhing like living things. Panic surged within her, threatening to consume every rational thought. She needed to leave. Now. But how? Which way was the exit? Then she felt it, a cold touch against her cheek, like icy breath on skin too warm. She froze, terror rooting her in place as fingers traced down her jawline, around her neck, before settling heavily upon her shoulder. "You shouldn't have come here," said a voice directly behind her ear, sending shivers cascading down her spine. It was low, guttural, laced with malice. Beth knew without doubt that this thing, whatever it was, had once been human too. Now, it was something else entirely. She tried to speak, but terror had stolen her voice. Instead, she stood paralyzed while those fingers tightened around her shoulder, nails digging into flesh until blood welled beneath them. "Let's play a game," the thing whispered, breath hot against Beth's ear. "You try to find your way out, and we'll see how long you last." With that, it released her abruptly, pushing Beth stumbling forward into the darkness. She caught herself just before falling, heart hammering wildly as she whirled around in search of its form again. But there was nothing but empty air where it had stood mere moments ago. Then came more footsteps, dozens now, perhaps hundreds, echoing from every direction at once. Each one seemed to reverberate through Beth's very bones, rattling her already fragile composure until she thought she might break apart entirely. She ran then, fleeing blindly into the dark without any clear sense of where she was going. The footsteps pursued her relentlessly, their rhythm changing sporadically as if their owners were enjoying some cruel game of cat and mouse. The shadows twisted around her like spectral tendrils reaching out to ensnare their prey. She could feel them brushing against her skin, leaving trails of ice behind before dissolving once more into the gloom. It was then she realized with rising horror that these weren't mere illusions. They were alive somehow, feeding off her fear. But there was no time to ponder such horrors now. She needed light, anything, to escape this labyrinthine hell. Her hands scrambled desperately along walls slick with moisture and God knew what else, searching for some sign of a door handle or switch. Anything. Then suddenly, her fingers closed around something cold and metallic. A doorknob. Hope surged within her as she twisted it, pushing open the door behind which lay not salvation, but more darkness still. "Damn it!" she cried out, voice echoing miserably in this forsaken place. But then something caught her eye, a faint glow coming from beneath another door further down the corridor. She sprinted towards it, heart pounding like a drum in her ears. As she reached for the handle, those footsteps seemed to grow louder still, their echoes mingling with hers until they were one cacophony of pursuit. But she couldn't stop now, not after coming so close to escape. She threw open the door and dashed inside, slamming it shut behind her before sliding down its length until she was sitting huddled on the floor. Silence reigned supreme here, broken only by Beth's ragged breaths as she struggled to regain control of her racing heart. Slowly she looked up, taking in her surroundings with cautious hope. It appeared to be some sort of study or library, books lining shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, while a large desk dominated the far wall, beneath a single window, letting in slivers of moonlight. A heavy wooden chair sat behind it, turned slightly as if its occupant had only just risen moments ago. And there, standing before the desk with his back to Beth, was Max again. Or at least, something wearing his skin like a second-rate disguise. Its shoulders rose and fell slowly, rhythmically, as though it were breathing deeply despite lacking lungs capable of such feats. Beth watched in horror, as those shoulders began turning slowly towards her, each movement sending fresh waves of dread crashing through her veins. She knew what would happen next. She'd seen it before when they first found him out there amidst the woods. Those eyes would meet hers, glowing with an unnatural light that spoke volumes about who, or what, now inhabited his flesh. And sure enough, there it was. Max's face turned towards her finally, features slack and lifeless until those eyes met hers and widened suddenly, revealing a hunger unlike any she'd ever seen before. "Mother," he rasped, voice echoing eerily around the room despite its soft volume. "You shouldn't have come here." Beth scrambled back against the door, terror rooting her in place once more as Max took a single step forward, then another, and another still, until finally he stood mere feet away, looming over her with all the... In the chill of their abandoned tent, Tom sat cross-legged amidst the scattered remnants of their camping trip. Empty beer cans, half-burnt marshmallows, and a map that seemed to mock them with its promise of nearby wonders now lost. His fingers traced lines on the crumpled paper, trying to find meaning in the faded ink. But it was another object tucked within Max's backpack that drew his attention. A worn leather journal bound tight by a tattered cord. He untied it slowly, almost reverently, as if handling something fragile. The pages were yellowed and dog-eared, filled with handwriting neat, yet hurried, like thoughts too eager to be contained. Tom recognized Max's script from school papers they'd exchanged over years of shared classes, but this was different. It was messier, more erratic. The first entries were innocuous enough. Notes about wildlife, observations on the changing weather patterns. Then, without warning, it veered off into something else entirely. September 12th. Heard whispers today while walking alone by the lake. They seemed to come from everywhere, yet nowhere specifically. It was unsettling but intriguing. Tom paused, rubbing his thumb over the words as if he could wipe away their meaning. He glanced around nervously before continuing. September 15th. Found an old newspaper clipping tucked into a book at the local library today. It's about whispering pines and some legend called the Faceless One, a vengeful spirit supposedly haunting these woods since forever. Tom felt his skin prickle as he read on, Max's obsession with this local myth growing increasingly palpable. September 18th. Went back to the lake today. The whispers were louder, clearer. They spoke of her, the Faceless One. I think she wants me to know her story. A chill ran down Tom's spine, despite the warmth of their dying campfire. He hugged his knees tighter against his chest, eyes scanning the surrounding darkness warily. September 21st. I've started seeing things out here at night. Shadows moving where there shouldn't be any movement. Sometimes I think they're trying to communicate with me. Tom's heart pounded in his ears now, each beat echoing Max's descent into madness on every page. September 25th. She spoke to me tonight. Her voice was cold but not unkind. She told me what happened here all those years ago. How she was wronged. How they took her face. The journal ended abruptly after that, the last few pages torn out roughly. Tom felt bile rise in his throat as he closed the book gently, tying it back up with trembling fingers. He glanced around again, half expecting to see something moving in the gloom. But all was still, except for the crackling fire and distant hoots of an owl. He needed to tell Beth about this. She had to know what Max had been delving into before whatever happened down there in those caves. Maybe it would explain why he seemed so changed, so otherworldly. As Tom stood, clutching the journal tightly against his chest like a shield against unseen horrors, he noticed something else sticking out from Max's backpack. Another piece of paper, crumpled and discarded. He pulled it out carefully, smoothing it flat. A map of whispering pines, marked with lines leading deep into the cave system they'd explored earlier. And at its heart, a single word written in Max's handwriting. Air. A shiver racked Tom's body as he realized what this meant. Max hadn't just been exploring these caves out of curiosity or adventure. He'd been searching for something. Someone. And now, so was the thing wearing his face. Tom fled the tent, journal clutched tightly in one hand, map fluttering wildly behind him like a dying moth. He had to warn Beth. They couldn't stay here any longer. They needed to leave Whispering Pines tonight if they wanted to live through tomorrow's dawn. But as he approached the cabin where Beth was waiting, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The door stood slightly ajar, just enough for shadows to leak out like an inky wound. No light spilled forth from within. It seemed as though all illumination had been swallowed whole by darkness. "Beth?" Tom whispered, nudging the door open wider with trepidation. "I found something. We need to talk." Silence greeted him, heavy and oppressive. Then came a noise, soft, barely audible but unmistakable nonetheless. A low growl that seemed to emanate from every corner of the room. Tom stepped inside slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim light. He could make out shapes now. The desk, the chair, Max standing before it all, his back turned towards Tom once more. Except something was different this time. His shoulders moved not with deep breaths, but violent shuddering. And when he began turning around slowly, deliberately, there was no hunger in those glowing eyes. Instead, they burned with a wild fury that made Tom's heart freeze mid-beat. Behind Max, huddled against the wall like a frightened animal, crouched Beth. Her hands were pressed tightly over her ears, blocking out something Tom couldn't hear but knew instinctively was there. Those whispers, louder now than ever before. But it wasn't just the voices that chilled him to his core. It was what she held, clutched against her chest. A bloody rag doll with no face, its features hacked away violently. And around its neck hung a small wooden pendant, carved into an image Tom recognized all too well from Max's journal. The faceless one. In that moment, everything fell into place. The legend, Max's obsession, his transformation, even the entity hunting them through these caves. They were all connected by this vengeful spirit, bound together by blood and betrayal. And now, it seemed, Beth had been chosen as its latest vessel. The air in the cabin was thick, cloying, like breathing through a wet wool blanket. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he took in the scene before him. Beth, crouched against the wall, clutching that grotesque doll. Max turned towards him now, eyes blazing with an otherworldly fire, and the silence heavy and absolute, broken only by the soft rhythmic growl that seemed to echo from every corner of the room. "Beth," Tom whispered, barely audible even to his own ears. He felt a sudden urge to retreat, to run back into the safety of the forest where at least there were familiar horrors. But his limbs refused to obey, rooted in place by some unseen force. Max didn't move, didn't speak. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like a curious dog sniffing out its master's intentions. The growl grew louder, more insistent, resonating deep within Tom's chest, until it felt as if his own heartbeat would drown him from within. Beth whimpered softly, drawing Tom's gaze back to her. She rocked gently, cradling the doll like a newborn child. Her eyes were wide, wild, staring at something only she could see. There was no recognition there, no spark of humanity left in those glassy orbs. Tom took a tentative step forward, one hand outstretched towards Beth. "It's okay," he murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to reassure. "I'm here now." Max reacted instantly, moving faster than Tom thought possible. In an instant, he stood between them, blocking Tom's path with his body. His growl escalated into a full-throated snarl, lips curling back to reveal teeth stained dark with blood. "Max," Tom pleaded, keeping his voice low, calm despite the fear clawing at his insides. "That's not you. You're better than this." For a moment, something flickered in Max's eyes. A brief flash of recognition, perhaps? Then it was gone, swallowed by the rage burning within him. He lunged, fingers curled into claws, aiming for Tom's throat. Tom stumbled backwards, barely avoiding those sharpened nails. His foot caught on something solid, one of Lily's toys forgotten in his haste to find Beth, and he went down hard, landing with a grunt on the cold wooden floor. The wind was knocked out of him, leaving him gasping like a landed fish. Max loomed over him, eyes gleaming with triumph. But before he could pounce, something darted between them, a blur of movement that sent Max sprawling away from Tom. Beth stood there now, still clutching the doll, but now also armed with a heavy flashlight which he'd swung at Max's head. "Get out," she hissed, voice barely above a whisper yet somehow filling the room entirely. "Leave him alone." Max rose slowly, shaking off the blow as if it were nothing more than an annoying mosquito buzzing around his ear. He turned to face Beth, snarls tapering off into that low growl once more. Tom watched in horror as Max approached Beth, each step measured, deliberate. She stood her ground, brandishing the flashlight like a sword, but Tom could see her hands shaking. Fear radiated from her in palpable waves, threatening to suffocate him where he lay. He had to do something. Anything. He couldn't just lie here while whatever was inside Max tore them apart one by one. With renewed determination, Tom pushed himself upright, ignoring the dull ache in his ribs. His gaze fell on Lily's toy box again, and an idea began to form in his mind. Desperate times called for desperate measures, after all. Reaching into the box, he closed his hand around the first toy that came to mind. A small plush bear with button eyes. It wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe. He held up the bear, letting it dangle from one paw like a puppet on strings. "Max," Tom called out softly, trying to mimic the voice he'd heard in the cave earlier that day. "You know this is mine. You took it from me." The effect was immediate. Max stopped mid-stride, head snapping towards Tom with a ferocity that made his blood run cold again. But there was something else too, something almost like confusion. "Max," Tom continued, emboldened by the slight change in his friend's demeanor. He took a step forward, holding the bear up before him like an offering. "I need you back. We all do." Beth watched him warily, flashlight still raised, but now pointed at Tom rather than Max. She seemed torn between fear of whatever was happening with Max and uncertainty about what Tom planned to do. Max took another step towards them, then paused again, tilting his head slightly as if listening intently for something neither Beth nor Tom could hear. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, snatching the bear from Tom's grasp before darting back into the shadows once more. Tom stood there stunned, heart pounding wildly in his chest. What had just happened? Had it worked? Beth lowered her weapon slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you?" she began, voice barely above a whisper. Before Tom could respond, Max emerged from the darkness again, cradling the bear like a treasured keepsake. And this time there was no mistaking the look in his eyes. It was pure, unadulterated terror. "Max?" Tom asked tentatively. Taking another step closer to him now, the Beth seemed safely distracted by the change in their attacker's behavior. "Is it you?" Max looked up at him then, and something passed between them. Some silent understanding born of shared trauma and fear. Then Max nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, before turning his gaze back downwards towards the bear, clutched tightly against his chest. "What happened?" Beth asked softly, stepping closer now herself despite still holding the flashlight like a lifeline. Did you bring him back?" "I don't know," Tom admitted truthfully. He reached out tentatively, placing one hand on Max's shoulder. It felt solid beneath his touch, real. No longer the terrifying creature they'd faced moments earlier, but simply his friend once more. But could it last? Or was this just another trick of whatever held sway over Whispering Pines caves? "Max," Tom said softly, keeping his voice low despite the desperate urgency pounding through him. "What do we do now?" Max looked up at him again, those haunted eyes filled with a pain Tom couldn't begin to comprehend. Then he opened his mouth, and when he spoke, it was in that same eerie whisper they'd heard echoing through the caves earlier. "You must find her," Max intoned, voice barely above a breath yet somehow filling the room entirely. "Find the faceless one and make things right." Tom shivered involuntarily at those words, feeling as if an icy hand had reached into his very soul and squeezed it tight. Beside him, Beth gasped softly, "Clutch." The wind howled through Whispering Pines like a banshee's wail, each gust tearing at their tents with malevolent glee. Tom huddled beside Beth and Max, their breaths misting in the chilly air of the final night at the campsite. The fire crackled and spat, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with an unnatural life. Tom's mind churned with thoughts of the Faceless One, of Max's transformation, and his cryptic words. He knew they had to face whatever haunted these woods before they could hope to escape it. But how? How did one confront such a malevolent force? Beth broke the silence first, her voice barely audible over the wind. "What do you think he meant by, make things right?" She glanced at Max, who sat staring into the flames, his expression unreadable. Tom shook his head. "I don't know, but I think it has something to do with Lily's toy box." He reached for the worn wooden chest beside him, running his fingers over its carved surface, as if seeking answers etched within the grain. Max turned to look at them then, his eyes reflecting the firelight like embers. "Lily," he whispered, and Tom felt a chill run down his spine despite the heat of the blaze. There was something wrong with Max's voice, an echo of that ancient whisper they'd heard in the caves. Beth reached out tentatively, placing her hand on Max's arm. "Max," she said softly, "what happened to you? Where did you go?" Max looked at her for a long moment before answering, his voice still eerily soft. "I was lost," he whispered. "Lost in the darkness, in the caves. And then I found it, the Faceless One." He paused, shivering visibly despite the warmth of the fire. "It showed me things. Terrible things." Tom felt bile arise in his throat at Max's words, remembering the grotesque visions they'd seen on their descent into the cave system. What had Max witnessed? And how could any of them hope to stand against such horrors? As if answering his silent question, Max turned to him, eyes burning with intensity. "We have to find Lily," he insisted. "She's the key, Tom. She holds the power to send it back." Tom looked at Beth, uncertainty writ large across her face. But there was determination too, a resolve born of fear and desperation. They had no choice but to trust Max now, to follow his lead even if it meant venturing deeper into danger. "Okay," Tom said finally, nodding once in agreement. "We'll find Lily's toy box tomorrow, first thing, and then we'll figure out how to end this." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As the night wore on, the wind grew ever more violent, tearing at their tents with renewed ferocity, until finally, with a deafening roar, one of the poles snapped, sending canvas flying like a spectral sail into the darkness. Tom cursed under his breath, scrambling to his feet to retrieve it before it could disappear entirely into the night. "Be careful," Beth called after him, concern etched deeply in her voice. But Tom was already gone, swallowed by the storm and the consuming darkness beyond their circle of firelight. He stumbled through the undergrowth, arms outstretched against unseen obstacles, until finally his fingers closed around something solid, the escaped tent pole. But just as he gripped it tightly, another gust struck him full force, sending him crashing to his knees. And then he heard it. A voice carried on the wind, high-pitched and frightened, crying out for help. "Lily," Tom whispered, heart pounding wildly in his chest. He scrambled back towards camp, clutching the tent pole like a lifeline. But as he approached, he saw that Lily's tent was still standing, its flaps securely fastened against the storm. Confusion gave way to cold dread as realization dawned on him. That voice, it hadn't come from their campsite at all. It had come from the caves. Tom returned to the fire, shaking off water and debris like a wet dog. Beth looked up at him, relief in her eyes, but it faded quickly when she saw the expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, dread color in her voice. "I heard something," Tom admitted gruffly, kneeling down beside them once more. "A voice. I think it was Lily." Beth gasped, one hand flying to cover her mouth in shock. Max merely nodded grimly, as if he'd expected nothing less. "We have to find her," Beth insisted, fear warring with determination in her eyes. But Max shook his head slowly. "No," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "We need to wait until dawn. It's too dangerous out there now." "But what if she's hurt?" Beth argued, desperation creeping into her tone. "What if she needs us?" Max turned to look at her then, those haunted eyes filled with a pain Tom couldn't begin to comprehend. "She doesn't need us," he whispered. "Not anymore." Before Beth could respond, a sudden gust tore through their camp, sending sparks flying from the fire like a swarm of fiery insects. And amidst that chaos, another voice spoke, low, harsh, and utterly alien. "You cannot hide from me any longer," it rasped, each word sending shivers down Tom's spine. "I will have what is mine." The faceless one had found them. Panic surged through Tom like wildfire, but he forced himself to remain calm, to think clearly, despite the terror gripping his heart. They couldn't fight this thing directly. They needed a plan, something that would give them an advantage over whatever horrors lay ahead. And then it struck him, Lily's toy box. If Max was right about its power. He reached for the chest beside him, flipping open its lid to reveal the collection of dolls inside. But there was no time to search through them now. They needed something immediate, something powerful enough to turn the tide against their unseen foe. Tom's gaze fell upon a familiar grotesque figure nestled amongst the others, the same doll Beth had been clutching when he'd found her catatonic with fear earlier. He reached for it tentatively, fingers closing around its cold plastic flesh as if expecting it to bite. But instead of recoiling, Tom felt something else, a pulse of energy coursing through him like electricity, filling him with purpose and determination. This was it, he realized. This was the key to ending their torment once and for all. He held up the doll triumphantly, turning to face Beth and Max with newfound resolve burning in his eyes. "We're going after Lily," he declared firmly. "No." Beth nodded, fear giving way to grim determination as she reached out to take Tom's free hand in hers. Together they turned to face Max, who hesitated for only a moment before rising shakily to his feet. "Together?" Tom asked softly, searching Max's eyes for any sign of hesitation or... The wind howled like a chorus of tormented souls, clawing at their backs as they ventured into the storm's heart. Tom clutched Lily's doll tightly, its cold plastic eyes seeming to gaze accusingly at him, as if questioning why he hadn't saved her sooner. Beth stumbled beside him, her breath ragged and uneven, while Max limped along behind them, his body hunched against the gale. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by more than just exhaustion and fear. Guilt clawed at Tom's insides like a savage beast, tearing apart any remnants of hope or courage that dared to surface. He had brought them here, led them all into this nightmare, and now Lily. No, he couldn't think about that. Not yet. Not until they found her. The campsite fell away behind them, swallowed by darkness and rain. Trees loomed like skeletal giants, branches reaching out like bony fingers intent on dragging them back into the abyss. The world beyond their meager circle of light was a void, filled with unseen horrors, waiting to pounce at any moment. They pressed on, driven by desperation and the primal need for survival. Tom could feel it now, the Faceless One's malevolent presence growing stronger with each passing second. It whispered through the wind, its voice echoing in his mind like distant thunder. Soon, it promised. Soon. A sudden burst of lightning illuminated the forest ahead, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move and writhe independently. Beth gasped, her grip tightening around Tom's hand as she pointed towards a massive oak tree standing sentinel amidst the chaos. Hanging from one of its lower branches was something small and pale, swaying gently in the wind. Tom squinted through the rain, heart pounding wildly against his ribs until he realized what they were looking at. It wasn't Lily. It couldn't be, not hanging there like some grotesque parody of a piñata. But even from this distance, he knew who it was. Beth. His voice caught in his throat, emotion threatening to overwhelm him entirely. He didn't want her to see what lay ahead, didn't want her to witness the full extent of their failure. But she shook her head resolutely, pushing past him towards the tree. "We have to know for sure," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the howling storm. They approached cautiously, eyes fixed on the lifeless form swaying gently above them. Up close, there was no mistaking Max's transformation. His features were twisted into a mask of pure terror, mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. His body hung limply from the rope around his neck, arms and legs dangling like those of a rag doll discarded by some careless child. Beth reached out tentatively, fingers brushing against Max's cold cheek before pulling back sharply as if burned. She turned away, burying her face in Tom's chest as tears spilled down her cheeks unchecked. Behind them, Max's body twitched once, then stilled completely. Tom held Beth tightly, feeling her tremors of grief shake through him like an echo of his own despair. They had failed Max. They had failed each other. And now... He looked back up at the lifeless form swaying gently above them, and suddenly it wasn't just Max anymore. It was all of them, past, present, and future, hanging there as a grim reminder of what awaited if they couldn't find Lily in time. We should bury him," Beth whispered brokenly after several long moments had passed. "When this is over." Tom nodded solemnly, making her a silent promise he vowed to keep no matter the cost. But first they had to finish what they'd started. They had to find Lily and end this once and for all. He took Beth's hand again, leading her away from Max's body towards the heart of the storm. The Faceless One's presence grew more intense with each passing step, its whispers evolving into a cacophony of screams that threatened to drown out all rational thought. Yet amidst that chaos, Tom felt something else too, a faint sense of warmth emanating from Lily's doll, still clutched tightly in his hand. It was as if the toy held some secret power, guiding him towards its owner even through the thickest fog of fear and despair. And so, he followed it without question, allowing it to lead them deeper into the forest than any of them had ever ventured before. The trees thinned out gradually, replaced by vast expanses of open wilderness bathed in silver moonlight, filtering through gaps in the storm clouds above. Here, the wind seemed less hostile, more like a gentle breeze carrying with it soft whispers of comfort and familiarity. They came upon a clearing where tall grass swayed gently beneath the moon's caress, beckoning them closer like welcoming arms outstretched towards long-lost children. At its center stood an ancient oak tree, its gnarled roots stretching out across the earth like veins pulsing with life. Beneath this venerable guardian stood Lily, her small form huddled against its trunk, as if seeking refuge within its timeless embrace. She appeared unharmed physically, but there was something different about her now. Something distant and otherworldly that sent shivers crawling down Tom's spine despite the warmth radiating from her doll. As they approached, she looked up at them with eyes filled with sorrow beyond her years. "I knew you'd come," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the soft rustling of leaves overhead. "He told me you would." "The faceless one?" Beth asked hesitantly, stepping closer to Lily despite Tom's warnings. Lily nodded solemnly. "It wants me, you know," she continued matter-of-factly, tracing patterns in the dirt with her finger. "It always has, but I wouldn't go willingly. I fought it every step of the way." Tom felt a chill run through him at the thought of this tiny child standing against such an ancient, malevolent force. Yet somehow, he wasn't entirely surprised. There was something inherently strong about Lily, even now. "Why does it want you?" he asked gently, crouching down beside her until they were eye level. She looked up at him then, those sad eyes filled with wisdom far beyond their years. "Because I'm special," she said simply. "I can see things others can't, like how everything has a spirit, even places and objects." "And the faceless one?" Beth prompted cautiously. "What does it want from you?" Lily shrugged helplessly. "To join its ranks, maybe? To become one of its endless army of lost souls wandering the earth forever?" She paused, considering her words carefully before adding, "Or perhaps it wants me to help it find something. Someone who can give it what it truly desires." Tom felt a shiver run down his spine at the implication behind her words. Whatever this creature was, whatever its ultimate goal, they had to stop it now before more lives were lost in vain. "We won't let that happen," he vowed firmly, taking Lily's small hand in his own. "We'll find